Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks, and welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. Well, this week we had a special guest stop by the KGPT studios, David Boaz, who is Executive Vice President of the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. David is one of the giants in the modern liberty movement, author of a number of books you can see here, Libertarianism, a primer, a really foundational work that he's at work revising right now, and then also The Politics of Freedom and other books as well. His articles appear in all the major news media, such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. He's a frequent guest on television shows of all types. Let's watch my interview with him when he was here in Wichita. Well, David, welcome to Wichita, and thank you for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
The Cato Institute is a think tank, and I think, like my mom last night when we were driving home from the dinner, she said, well, what are these think tanks? So I guess someone once said maybe a Zelo is like a university without students. Is that a good way to describe it?
Well, sort of. That's a much older term, actually. It's not mine. The Brookings Institution, which was sort of the first of these, was described that way, I think. And what that means is it has people who might have been professors or at least have the educational background of professors who are there doing research and writing books and writing studies, but they don't have students. They don't teach classes. These days, most think tanks are probably a little more activist than that. They're thinking about issues that are on the table, issues that are not on the table but ought to be. And in addition to books and studies, they tend to publish newspaper op-eds and blog posts and so on. But it is a group of people who hopefully are expert on policy topics, who work together and do research and inform the public and the lawmakers of the results of their research.
And so for Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., it's located. The mission of it, do you have a particular political stance or?
Well, I think most people would identify us as libertarian. Our mission is to increase public understanding of the ideas of individual liberty, limited government, free markets, and peace.
And I think there's been, we see that word used a little bit more now. I know about a month ago in the Wichita Eagle, they printed a column that slammed libertarianism, and I reached out to you, the Cato Institute, and a colleague of yours provided a response. So that's very helpful to us as well. So libertarianism, I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder, David, because, we think... academically, I guess we have something called the non-aggression axiom, but I've heard you say very often, I think you said it last night at the talk, don't hit people and don't take their stuff. Is it really as simple as that?
Well, at one level, yes, it is as simple as that. And I always say, there was a bestseller, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And if you think about it, the rules of libertarianism, which are also the rules of civilization, are don't hit other people, don't take their stuff, and keep your promises. And that's the basis of all contract law there. Everybody abides by these rules in their personal life. Sometimes we make mistakes, and some people need to be locked up because they make those mistakes intentionally. But almost everybody abides by those rules in their own life. All libertarians are saying is society works better when government abides by those rules too. Don't impose your will on people, don't take their stuff, and keep the promises you make. So yes, that's one way to look at what libertarianism is. It's just the basic idea of not imposing by force on other people.
And I think that's kind of curious that libertarians think that government should follow the same type of rules that regular people like you and I have to follow. And people say, well, government, we'd have chaos, we'd have anarchy if that was the case.
Well, I think it's curious that people don't think government should follow the same rules that honest people have to follow. Government is created to protect our rights. That is specifically to protect us from people who might hit us or take our stuff or take something from us on the basis of a promise and then not deliver what they promised. When government gets into trying to run our lives, it creates all kinds of social conflict. If government is going to tell us how to dress, then we're going to have political battles over what kind of clothes to wear. If government is going to tell us how to worship, then we're going to get political battles over religion. And you can just go down the list. If government tells us what to smoke, whether it's marijuana or tobacco or whatever, then we'll have fights over that. If government runs the schools, then we have to have fights over, should there be a Pledge of Allegiance? Should there be religion in the school? Should they allow gay teachers? Should they teach American history this way or that way? Take those away from the government, and then there's no political problem. You pick the schools that look best for your kids. I pick the schools that look best for my kids. We don't have to go down to the city council or the school board and fight about it politically. So I think it's pretty clear that if the government follows these simple rules, forbids us all from hitting other people and taking their stuff, then we don't have anarchy, we have social order, and we have economic progress.
And I think, unfortunately, it seems that I don't know, some people think there's kind of a resurgence in freedom. Other people, like me, I think are a little more pessimistic, talking about government as government becomes more involved in health care, which is happening now and doesn't seem we can turn that tide. When government's paying for everybody's health care, then government has an intense interest in can you have salt on those French fries and things like that. So I think really there's a lot of dangers coming ahead still.
Well, I think that's right. One of the things we learn in the healthcare systems of other countries that have nationalized their systems is they feel cost pressures and they start doing things like rationing care. There was a story in the paper just this week of a former mayor in an English city who had also been the head of the local health authority, who died because her operation had been postponed 4 times. Now, that's one of the ways you save money in a government-controlled system. You delay operations. You put people on waiting lists, and sometimes that has tragic consequences. And, as you say, if the government is responsible for our health care, then it starts to think, and maybe even you and I start to think, that our neighbors shouldn't be allowed to ride motorcycles if that's dangerous and is going to end up costing us money. Exactly. And why are you buying French fries? Because that's going to create health problems in the future and I'll have to pay for them. Better to keep those things out of the government, and then whatever bad decisions you make, you pay for, and whatever bad decisions I make, I'll end up paying the consequences for. Exactly. And we'll tend to make better decisions if we know that we'll individually face the consequences.
Yeah. You know, that medical tourism, we have a hospital here in Wichita that has a specialty kind of branch where Canadians who can't get hip transplants and things come to Wichita to have that done. So,
I usually hear about those on the northern border. It must be a good one if they come this far.
I think they kind of build themselves as a first-class hotel for these types of things. Well, let's take a moment off for a commercial break. I'm Bob Weeks. We'll be back in just a moment.
Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be right back.
Well, welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and in the studio this week is David Boaz, Executive Vice President of the Cato Institute. Some of the things we were talking about earlier led me to recall a term that you and Cato and I think others have used, which is the civil society. I think some of the things that we talked about in the earlier segment hint at that. What is a civil society, and is it distinguished from a political society?
It can be, yes. A lot of times when people hear the term civil society, they think it just means people being nice to each other, you know, civil discourse, and that's part of it. The basic idea in political science or sociology of civil society is all the associations people have with each other. We're not Robinson Crusoe. We live with other people, and civil society includes the associations. Some people want to exclude business from that. I think business is part of civil society because, after all, that's where we live a great deal of our lives.
Absolutely.
Is in earning our livings and trading with other people. So I would say it includes businesses, churches, nonprofits, clubs, communities, neighborhoods, all of those associations. And I would contrast it to political society, the society of government, which is based on force. Civil society is entirely voluntary. Whether or not it's a church or a business or whatever, those are voluntary relationships among people, chosen relationships. Government necessarily is using force. So that's why libertarians say we ought to confine that use of force to the narrowest area possible. And that's why it's a good idea, in my view, to have policemen to protect us from each other and arrest wrongdoers, and courts to settle our disputes, and we need a national defense to protect us from dangerous forces overseas. But we want to keep the use of force narrowly circumscribed. We should not be using force to tell people where they have to send their kids to school, how they have to save for retirement, what they can smoke, what they can eat, what they can drink, any of those kinds of things. Now, I should just interject, that's for adults. There may be different rules for children. It may be appropriate to say, well, children can't drink alcohol. It's not appropriate to take the rules for children and apply them to adults.
And I think that's, you mentioned like Social Security, retirement, think about what government has done. People of my generation, I think they're not accustomed to saving for their own retirement. They're just looking for the Social Security or some other government pension or something like that. So it's really taken us away from a nation of investors where each person saves and invests their money and has a rooting interest in the country, and turned it into fighting over things like Social Security.
Well, that's right. People were told Social Security is your retirement plan. Now, originally, they didn't pitch it that way. It was supposed to be a supplemental plan. But it's gotten to be 12% of your income, 12% that's taken out of your paycheck, plus another 3% for Medicare. So that seems like a big chunk, and people assume that's my retirement plan. And the problem is, someday soon, Social Security is going to run out of money. Been hearing a lot about, the government running out of money, shutdowns and default and things. Someday soon, the Social Security system will run out of money, and all the people who had their money taken by force and were told we're taking care of your retirement are going to face a rude awakening.
Yeah, and there is no contract there. I mean, Congress can change the Social Security
Supreme Court
benefits.
has made it clear twice that there is no contractual right to Social Security.
But we feel like there is. I mean, people my age who are going to be retiring in the next couple decades or something. So, yeah, that could really set up some intergenerational strife, I think.
Right.
Same with healthcare, too, as the baby boomers get older and start to have problems. Well, sometimes we see in the newspapers where people talk about radical libertarians don't want any government and things like that. They say, why don't you just move to Somalia? There's an example of the libertarian state in action. I have a feeling that there's about 5 things wrong with that assumption. Can you help us out with that?
Well, that's a silly argument. Somalia is a warlord state, and they have no civil society. They have nothing like the United States history, the civil society that we have here, the social order here. So it's just a silly point. They might say, I guess you want to be like Hong Kong. Well, you mean the place that had the fastest economic growth over the past 50 years with the fewest regulations and taxes? Yeah, that seems like a good model.
Yeah, but Somalia, they don't have the infrastructure, the respect for property and civil rights and the various types of things like that. So another thing is also people say, okay, libertarians generally advocate an end to the war on drugs. So they say, well, that means you recommend that people use marijuana, cocaine, heroin, or whatever. That's a fallacy, isn't it?
I had a conversation with a very distinguished conservative leader just a couple of weeks ago at the Cato Institute who made precisely that point. If the government allows gay people to marry, it's endorsing that. If the government legalizes drugs, it's endorsing that. We still live in a relatively free society, and lots of things are allowed to us. I pointed out to this guy at the time, the government allows people to write and sell racist books. Does that mean the government is endorsing racist books? I don't think so. The government allows people to sell Playboy magazine and Hustler magazine. Does that mean the government is endorsing Hustler magazine? No, it just means in a free society people do all sorts of things. So what libertarians say is adults ought to be able to make their own decision on what they smoke. And if they want to smoke marijuana, that ought to be their business. It also is their responsibility to bear the consequences if there are any negative consequences for them. And we point out the negative consequences of prohibition. Everybody knows what a disaster alcohol prohibition was. It gave us the St. Valentine's Day massacre and rampant crime. Murder rates went like this during prohibition. Murder rates fall after prohibition. Well, it's the same thing with drug prohibition. It's not quite as visible because more people use alcohol than use illegal drugs. But the same levels, the same kinds of crime being generated, the same kinds of irresponsibility because people are not able to learn how to use alcohol in one case, marijuana in another case, sensibly and responsibly. Lots of bad consequences of that. But we have to get away from this idea that if the government allows you to do something, wearing, brown shoes with a black suit, that means they're endorsing it.
Mm-hmm. That's very important, I think. Well, let's take another commercial break. I'm Bob Weeks. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week is David Boaz, Executive Vice President of the Cato Institute. Well, David, in Wichita, we have been taking a planning process that's been going on for about a year. The city and county together sent out a survey to people. They sent out about 25,000 of them. It was about a dozen pages long, I think, and there were some questions on there that a lot of us had trouble with. Some of them had, I think, factual mistakes in their premise, but here is one here. Citizens were asked to say that they strongly agree or neutral or disagree with some statements like this, and here's one here. I am willing to put community interests above personal interests, and also most people are willing to put community interests above personal interests. It sounds like they're setting up that if we're interested in our own person, then that's bad for the community. Is there something wrong with that?
There certainly is something wrong with it, and that is kind of the basis of collectivism on both the right and the left, the idea that there is this conflict. I believe that when people act in their own interest, as inevitably we do, whether it's finding the right person to marry or deciding how many kids to have or what job to go into or whether to expand your business, of course you're acting in your own interest. Mm-hmm. But as Adam Smith said, in doing that, you are guided as if by an invisible hand to do things that are good for others. Mm-hmm. You can't make any money unless you are providing a useful service to other people. If you decide that what you want to do is be a painter and make your living painting, but you're a bad painter and nobody wants to buy your stuff, then you're not providing any service to others and you won't make a living that way. Now, the government might come in and subsidize you to be a bad painter, and that's not in the community interest. That's a waste of resources because you might be a good shoemaker even though you're a lousy painter. So one of the things the market process does is help people and resources flow to where they're actually wanted by other people. And when the government steps in and says, we know the community interest, what is the community interest? Is it having subsidized hotels? Is it having bicycle paths? Is it having more people on welfare? I don't think any of those are actually in the interest of the community. They may be in the interest of some of the special interests who are involved and powerful in government. But the community interest, it seems to me, is served by having businesses that provide them with what they want. And if that means more grocery stores or fewer grocery stores or more upscale grocery stores, all of those things can be found out in the marketplace. They will not be found out by the government deciding which one to subsidize. So I think it's a misnomer to assume that there's a conflict between individuals pursuing their own family and personal interest and community interest, because who is defining this community interest? Inevitably, it is a group of well-connected, politically influential people. It's not all of us through the market process. You want to know what the community is? Sometimes people say, it's not in the community interest to have Walmart here. People don't want Walmart. They want our local businesses. Well, if that's true, then Walmart will come in and fail because no one will shop there. What they really mean is some of us civic leaders and the people who donate to our campaigns do not want our customers to start going to Walmart, so we want to prevent Walmart from coming into this community because it's not in the community interest. But it actually is in the community interest if the community shops there.
Right. And, people adapt too. We do see that Walmart may drive some stores out of business, but then other stores do things that Walmart doesn't do, or they do it better, and they find their own niche and get along in that way.
I'll tell you one thing you see businesses gravitating to open near a Walmart. They know it'll bring a lot of people in, and then they will also spill off and go to these other businesses.
Yeah, exactly right. We had a editorial in the Wichita Eagle yesterday, I think it was, written by the former editor of the Eagle, that he talked about, and this is related to that, he says, simply because enough people voted for them instead of someone else, talking about an elected official or some policy, simply because enough people voted for them instead of someone else does not mean everyone did, nor does winning guarantee that campaign promises can be instantly delivered upon, or that all who disagree are rendered irrelevant. So I think I was surprised to hear him write this, because it was kind of out of character for him, but I think he's kind of hitting that government is kind of a one-size-fit-all. I mean, we have an election, someone wins, someone loses, and we have to go with what the winners say.
Well, that's right. In a community, if 51% of us like pepperoni pizza and 49% like vegetarian pizza, then what happens? 49% of us eat vegetarian pizza, the others eat pepperoni. But if pizza is provided by the government, then we have a big political fight, and eventually the pepperoni people win 51 to 49, and then everybody gets pepperoni pizza. And that's the problem with having political forces make those decisions. You have a temporary majority, typically, influenced by lobbying, campaign spending, incumbent power. They elect people, and then maybe the 49% don't get what they want, the 51% get what they want, instead of everybody getting what they wanted. Plus, as he also hints at, sometimes the politicians made promises that just cannot be fulfilled. They don't make sense, they're unsustainable, and sometimes they're not even telling you the truth.
They're just lying to us sometimes.
We've had a lot of people get elected president promising that they wouldn't raise taxes, and then they do. So it's a terrible system for making community decisions. Devolve, decentralize, let people make their own decisions, and then those who want vegetarian can have it, and those who want pepperoni can have that.
And when you look at it, many of our elections are settled really pretty narrowly. I mean, I think Barack Obama got 53% in the last election. They called that a landslide.
Actually, he got 51% in his second election.
Okay, and they call that a landslide. It's not like these issues are settled by 95 to 5, but even if it was 95 to 5, what about the 5?
Well, that's right. In America, we have always had some tension between government, the use of force, and individualism. And in America, we've always believed the smallest minority is the individual's rights must be protected. And what libertarians are saying is we take that American creed seriously. The individual's rights must be protected. And not just his right to criticize the government, which is important, but also his right to actually make his own decision instead of being told what to do and then having the right to criticize. So if you want to save for retirement in your own private plan, you should be able to do that. If you want to smoke tobacco or marijuana, you ought to be able to make that decision. If you want to send your kids to a religious school, why should the government tell you, we're going to tax you and provide you with this non-religious school? Why not let you keep your own money and send your kids to whatever school you want to?
And finally, I think in just about a minute that we have left, a lot of times when I criticize a government program and say this is a bad thing and we shouldn't do it, a city council member or mayor will shoot back, well, Bob, what is your plan? And I'm sometimes flummoxed there because as libertarian, I really don't have a plan other than, the simple system of natural liberty. I think that's Adam Smith who said that. So we're criticized for not having a plan for your life. How can we overcome some of that objection?
We have to point out to people that most of the important things in life were never planned. The English language was never planned. Money originally wasn't planned. It evolved because people needed to trade. Then the government took over money. You've got your notes here on an iPad. Nobody planned the explosion of technology that came out of Silicon Valley. In France, they sort of tried to plan it, and they came up with a system called the Minitel, and people like Al Gore went around saying, they have a plan in France, and they have Minitel. Minitel very quickly became technologically backward, but there was this huge government investment in it, and they didn't want to move on. What we want is robust, dynamic companies, individuals inventing and innovating and providing things that satisfy people's needs, and nobody can plan for innovation and invention. So if you want a stagnant society where nothing changes, then you should have a plan. If you want dynamism, then you want no plan.
Yeah, I think, and I don't think we necessarily call Germany, a really free society, but someone once said, look at the cars that East Germany produced, the Trabant or whatever. They're a terrible thing. John Stossel had one time. And look what West Germany created, Mercedes, Porsche, all those types of cars.
And also Volkswagen for people who can't buy Porsches.
So that's the same people, the same culture, and look at the difference there, the difference being government, in the different types of government in the two. Well, David, thank you very much for coming to Wichita.
Thank you.
This has been very informative, and we'll hope to see you back sometime here in our town. Well, thanks for watching this week of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.